Kushal Shah is the managing partner for Middle East for Roland Berger. He joined the firm in 2011, leading the telecoms practice in the region and beyond. Kushal is a member of the investment committee of the region's largest venture capital company. He spent 12 years with the leading consultancy in Dubai and London. He is also involved in the startup ecosystem and is one of the founders of Dubai Angel Investors, which empowers and supports startups and entrepreneurs. Kush studied economics at Cambridge in the UK. We are here today with an amazing man, a man who's a consultant by profession, an investor in terms of his passion, and a great human being at heart. And he's actually come together to talk to us about the kinds of things that he's doing in the world to make a difference, to bring about change, to help young people, to feed the ecosystem in the startup space. But you need to have a big heart and a lot of courage to be able to do that. And he's actually doing that and driving this thing through. So today we're going to be talking about his life, how he impacts us, and how he helps to make a difference in the future. So we'd like to talk to Kushal Shah. Kushal, welcome. Good to see you. Kushal is the managing partner at Roland Berger, and he's also one of the board members and the investment committee members at the Dubai Angel Investors, amongst the various other things that he's doing. Buddy, how do you do this? I mean, this is so much. You're juggling about 6 balls in the air. How does it all come together?
First, you have to learn not to sleep.
Okay.
No, it's very much adrenaline driven. You have to do this with so much passion that the adrenaline keeps driving you. Once in a while, you crash, and you take some time off. But there is a lot of adrenaline, both in myself, but also with the people around you, and they drive more and more of this.
So what's that dynamo inside you? What's that engine inside you that makes you jump out of bed and click the adrenaline into the game? What's driving you?
It's the others. It's the people you see, and it's the people who drive you, because you're always engaging with either the young or the old or the very different who you say, how are they doing it, and what's driving them, and that kind of you feed off each other.
Kushal, going back to the early days of your life, when you were a young child, because you come from different parts of the world and you're actually a very eclectic mix of 3 or 4 continents, what are your earliest memories in terms of how you grew up?
So I grew up in a little suburb in Nairobi, in Kenya. And in the suburb, I'd come home from school, run about 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes to jump over a wall and go for a swim. And that was my daily routine every day after school from the age of 8 to 16, literally daily. And obviously you form a bunch of friends and relationships at the pool or along that routine. And my main relationship was with my swimming coach at that point, who was, when I was 14, a 25-year-old Kenyan, local Kenyan, who would be telling me how he thinks, how he feels, how he digests information, which is very different from the way I was brought up, the culture I was brought up, etc. So I'm kind of being bombarded by a completely different perspective. At the same time, is pushing me to go to my limit from a training perspective. So that's probably what drove some of my ambitions or some of my push at the early ages.
What did you learn from him? Were there any special examples that you could still carry from those days?
Yeah, the world is always different when you look at it from somebody else's eye. And until you look at it from that side, you just don't know.
Were you a naughty boy at school?
Who isn't?
Well, actually, you'd be surprised. There are some people who said they were not very naughty. But you're creative, so you must be naughty.
Yeah, let's say I've had to stand outside the classroom, sometimes outside the school gate for a few minutes, quite frequently. Yes.
Tell us about going to college and where did you end up and how did you get there?
So as of 16 or 17 years old, I hadn't left Africa as a continent. and then I traveled to the UK, which was the kind of natural. The natural college-going universities for anybody who was born in kind of my society in Kenya. And then the teachers were pushing me to apply to Cambridge. Luckily, I made it. So the first few months and weeks were a complete, I would say, cultural difference, despite everything I've done at a young age. The main cultural difference was that at home, if I meet you twice in the same day, I'll shake your hand twice in the same day. And anybody I tried to shake my hand twice or thrice on the same day was already looking at me and saying, "Are you trying to touch me? What's going on?" So you start to get the feeling that even the smallest of things are different.
So there are a lot of cultural shifts that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, you must be pretty smart to be able to apply to Cambridge straight out of Kenya and successfully get in. What were you reading at Cambridge?
Economics.
Okay, which means good at math.
Yeah, well, I'm Gujarati, so
Okay, yeah, that helps. Yeah,
it's DNA.
It's DNA. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So after graduating, how did you evolve your career from there?
So economics teaches you, I guess, how business works, and I've been brought up in a way to also understand how social works. So you're trying to combine society and economics together. And then I went to London and worked. Sorry, one more point there is when you're from the age of 20 to 23, at least in those days, 1990 to 93, you start pretty left. And as you start working and you start earning money and you start paying taxes, you slowly shift right. So when I came out of university, straight on, I'm left and I'm thinking left, and it took a while to shift right. At the same time, I wanted to make money, I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to make both. And it was hard to juggle them both together.
So was it long hair activists going out there on the streets? Nothing as much as that?
No. I would look at them and say, I wish I was one of those, but I would only look at that. Yeah.
My father used to say to me that if at 20 you're not an activist, we haven't brought you up properly. But at 40, if you're still an activist, then you lost the plot somewhere in the middle. So I've always remembered that. As a young person, when you go out there after your job, after your graduation, you look for your first job, and that usually is what helps to define at least the first 10 years of your life after graduating. What was going through your mind at that stage, and who did you apply for? What did you start with?
I think the first job was not as critical as what happened in the first job, or the application wasn't as critical. The first job actually came to me out of a competition that was being held at school, at university, where the company approached a bunch of students and said, "Hey, we're going to be hosting an event, and we see which team wins and what drove it." And I kind of won it, and they gave me a job as a result. It was barely an application.
So you never really wrote a proper CV. You didn't really need to, because you were just so super smart that you just got it.
No. I put a CV and got rejected pretty much before the interview process. So the competition was kind of skipping that.
Yeah. So, about 26 million people potentially would be watching this interview, and most of them are looking for jobs, and a lot of them are writing CVs. So what would you now as an employer, what would you like to see on a CV, and what's there on yours?
Maybe I'll go back to my point. It's not just about the CV, right? There's a lot of highlights on the CV, which you should emphasize. You should also find ways to step outside of your CV into the public's eye and ensure that they are seeing you in multiple ways, the CV.
But when you're applying to a job site, how can you jump out of the job site and get to the employer? So your first interface really is effectively what that information is on that piece of paper. What are the sort of things that you now, as a much more seasoned person, are looking for to find those nuggets on that piece of paper?
Short, first of all. Long never works. Nobody has time to read long. And usually in that short, you're looking for the bold parts. Mm-hmm. So you're looking to be told, to be given them in your face, the nuggets. And usually those nuggets, other than education, other than what you know, technical knowledge, what have you done a little bit that's extra? What have you done that makes you stand out from the typical crowd?
One of a Yale professors, he wrote what he described as my failure CV. All of the things that he failed in, and he put it down on a CV and said, these are the things that I failed in, and this is what I learned. I failed in and I applied for a chemistry professorship, but I failed in that, but I now have microbiology and it's far more rewarding. And this is what I learned. How would you feel if you received a failure CV in front of you?
Well, unless it's Jack Ma, who's then saying, he failed everything but was really successful.
Absolutely, yeah.
Again, the shorter the better if it's about failures. No, when you're very young, you don't want to overdo the failure discussion.
Right.
If you're 50 and you failed but you've got a name, it's a different story.
Yeah. Talking about failure, what is your view on failure? Because in this part of the world, failure is looked down upon, and culturally, people just don't understand it or accept it. Our schooling system is designed only to succeed. Offices, colleges, and universities, and then in business, you're really not encouraged to fail, and if you do, you're really out of the game. So failure has become an integral part of how do we cope with this changing environment.
I would say there are two types of failures. There's a failure where the future is uncertain and you're trying to take a path and you fail to, let's say, cross the river in that path, either because the river wasn't there and you took the wrong path, or you couldn't swim across, one or the other. That's one kind of failure, and we have to all live with that to figure out if the path is the right path, whether our process is the right process. The other kind of failure is something that you should have achieved, i.e. you know how to do it, you can see the other side, you just failed to actually make it to the other side because something went wrong in that bit. So when you can complete a race and you know exactly how to do it, but for whatever reason you panicked, you made the wrong moves and you failed. Those failures typically hurt more than the uncertain ones.
So it's a bit more that, people need to be able to, where they have the competence, they need to have the inner strength to be able to make sure that they can drive through. Otherwise, they've lost on something.
Yeah, and the inner strength sometimes is about also practicing it.
Mm-hmm.
When you know you can do it, I've known people who would literally try it out once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. So they've figured out which are the roadblocks along the way. So when the actual event happens, they don't fail.
A lot of careers have developed around the fear of failure. They may or may not have failed, but the fear of failure was there, and therefore they played the game within certain boundaries. So they were reasonably successful, but they never failed. So let's say somebody's worked for 10 years and they have never failed at anything. Do you look at them and say, oh, this guy is absolutely brilliant, or he hasn't tried hard enough?
Let's go back to maybe when most people are 1 year, 2 years old. One of the first things that people try to do is, let's say, take a step, a jump. Yeah. So you stand on steps, a staircase, and you say, oh, look, I jumped 1 step. And then you say, hey, let's try jump the 2nd step. And some don't do it, and some do it when they're a little bit older. But, you watch as you egg each other on and to take the 3rd step and the 4th step. The higher you jump, the more of a risk taker you are. At some point, you have to do that. Mm-hmm. And you can't wait, because otherwise you'll never jump. And then at some point you say, that's my edge. I'm not going to go beyond that edge, mm-hmm. because you feel you're going to get hurt in that process. So that becomes your limit. Mm-hmm. So business will go as far as you put your limit out. Mm-hmm. And the more you stretch your limit, the more you poke holes on your limits. And the more other people poke holes, and you need to be surrounded by people who are pushing your limits further out.
This brings us into a nice little segue about one of the passions that you have, and that is in the startup environment. A lot of individuals and organizations and institutions are extremely scared of going into startups because of the risks associated with that. Part of my thesis is that a startup is like a young child. Most people are looking for graduates, but they have to start somewhere. Is that part of your driver, that if you get a broad base of young people, young companies coming together, that it will build a nice portfolio for the future?
Startups, you need by definition, portfolio means everything, good, bad, stars and dogs, old and young, right? So you that's the whole point of a portfolio. If you're only surrounded by one type, you miss out on diversity. So diversity, I would say, is critical. And yes, the energy levels that come from young people are usually more, and from the graduates would be more. And making sure that energy is always in the system, in the portfolio, that is key. How do you provide that energy? Sometimes it's about people, sometimes it's about different ways of motivation, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's freedom. Very often, actually, it's that empowerment, allowing the person to think beyond.
There are people who don't support startups because they feel that let it be somebody else's problem, and when they have grown up a little bit, then we will talk to them. What kind of person looks at that young company, less than a year old, pre-revenues, certainly pre-income? What kind of mindset does one have to be able to do that?
The first time, there is usually an investment into a startup. Somebody has to make that investment. If it's the entrepreneur, usually that investment is his time and effort, which there's an opportunity cost too. And sometimes it's an angel or a corporate that is putting that cash stroke resource investment into it. When you make that investment, you're making a choice. You're making a choice between A and B. And a startup is always felt as the riskier choice compared to from a real estate to a traditional type business. So you say, until you've taken that risk the first time, second time, you haven't got that addiction to it. You haven't got the feeling for it. You haven't dabbled in it to get that adrenaline up. So that's actually what I'm trying to push, the first timers. Until you're a first timer, you're not a second timer. And most people are very scared to be a first timer because there are very few people in their paths above who've done it. So encouraging first timers is more important than encouraging a corporate or encouraging a process.
Do you think our universities prepare us properly to be a startup and to run a startup intelligently?
I think if you asked this question 2 years ago, no. Universities / schools. Yeah. I think now everybody's aware that this is, it's in the system. It's part of the curriculum.
Right. The key driver for me here is that I think our university system was set up 100 years ago for an industrial revolution environment. Yeah. Now we're in digital and the fourth industrial revolution environment, so the world has completely changed. So a 3-year degree program or a 4-year degree program is probably 3 years too long. You can learn all the objective learning in 1 year. And shouldn't the next 3 years be about apprenticeship, about testing, about tinkering, about making mistakes? So by the time you actually come into business life, you're actually ready to actually make a choice. Do I want to have a startup or do I want to work? And you are much better equipped to make that call. Is that something you support and drive?
I think it'll be different for different profiles of people. You can have both. Some people want to get on with it. My best friend from home, he didn't even go to university. And what took me 16, 17 years to finish at school, he finished at 14.
Right.
Didn't go to university because he was just wanting to get on with business. And he had a couple of ideas, fail or not, that he had to get on with. And he says, I need the training behind me, the schooling, the maths, the physics behind me. I need to know it, and then I'm going to launch. So there are people who need to just do those 3 years and get out. And there are people who actually say, no, give me 5 years and apprenticeship and internships and let me learn, and then I'll come out after 5 years and I'll be a better person. Very different people.
So jobs versus entrepreneurship, which one would you go for, and what are the variables we need to be looking at?
who said a job cannot be an entrepreneur, and who said an entrepreneur cannot have a job? So I think it's a mix, and I don't think we should even separate the two.
But I think that's exactly what you're doing in your job. I mean, you have a great job as a managing partner of Roland Berger, where when I first met you, I asked what's the differentiator, and you said entrepreneurship. We are more entrepreneurial than anybody else, and I found that very interesting, that a consultant being an entrepreneur, but I've known you since then and I've understood that. And on the other hand, you're dabbling and having fun with the entrepreneurship part, perhaps not so much yourself, but as an investor and a partner. How's that experience been for you?
Day and night. So partly one happens at night and one happens at day.
Yeah.
But however, it's mixing in where even inside the company or inside the entrepreneurship side, both sides of me come out. So within, let's say, my daily work, the Roland Berger side, the people around me will see both sides of me come out, and they will be influenced by it, whether they be my colleagues, whether they be my clients, whether they be recruits. And similarly, on the other side, once you're a consultant, you always feed that through how you articulate yourself, how you do your analysis, and that feeds through to the ecosystem around you.
You've touched a very interesting point for me, because amongst the things that I talk about is that we have a lot of leaders in the world. You are a leader, I'm a leader, and many others. But the question I ask is, are we digital leaders of the future? Are we able to handle the kind of nuances that the new world brings in? And what you're telling us right now is exactly that. You are more and more that flexible leader of the future, as opposed to a more traditional leader. One, are you? Two, what advice do you have for the 40-somethings who are sort of at a high level in their careers, but what's their inflection point? How do they go from here?
Maybe it goes back to, I think, based on what you asked me at the beginning, my red thread is, at the very beginning, understanding another person's culture, understanding the background. So that agility is not driven only by, I've tried business model A and it didn't work, or it worked, so let me tweak it and let me pivot. It's also understanding who you've tried it with and under what culture and under what organizational model. And that's where kind of combining the two, future business leaders stroke current business leaders have to combine all of the above. The agility is driven by culture, diversity, and speed of change.
You do a lot of work in technology and telecoms and artificial intelligence, cognitive computing, all this kind of cognitive learning. Is building computers and virtual assistants and so on is going to do all this left-hand side of your brain kind of work. So we're now left with the right-hand side of the brain, which is imagination, intuition, love, affection, collaboration. Firstly, do you agree with that? And secondly, what are you doing in terms of training people around you and enhancing yourself personally to be able to build this side of your brain to be successful in the future, to genuinely be successful in the future?
I think it's that divide line in the middle. The divide line in the middle is what I call what communicates. How do you articulate left and right? Mm-hmm. How do you articulate what your left is doing to the right and the other way around, which is what the public needs to see, because whether you're an artistic set and you bake the best, you build the best, you have a great recipe, mm-hmm. It needs to be articulated in a manner that comes back to somebody's tongue, mm-hmm. and vice versa. For me, that's what training should be about. Are you able to logically articulate yourself, whether it's through code, whether it's through music, whether it's through art, doesn't matter. Because if you're confused, then a few people might catch you, even though there might be super intelligence there, but very few will catch you. And if you're very articulate, no matter which part of the brain you're working, and whether you're using machines or not, at least you're able to emphasize the direction.
Who are your big role models in your life and why?
My father has to be one.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 12, 13, he had a small retail store, maybe the size of, let's say 10 by 5 square meter store. And first he'd teach me different parts of the business, which is fine. And then the best part was once you've learned all that and you know the basics, he says, come and sit with me. And we'd sit there and we'd watch customers walk in and out. And he says, now start guessing what they're going to do. Start watching them. And every Saturday I'd sit with him and we'd watch and we'd speculate what they do. And we'd explain to each other why we are forecasting what they're going to do. We'd explain that to each other. And that was basically giving me signals on how to react also. They're going to do this. Can you change their behavior? Mm-hmm. And that's what we spent Saturdays doing. So it was fun, but at the same time, you're learning business, you're learning anthropology one way or the other.
How do you, what do you do for fun? What gets you excited in terms of, I know you've spoken about your work and your investing and stuff, but what do you do for fun?
Pushing others over the edge. It's
so you're a sadist.
It's making people take the risk. Right. So when people are scared to take the risk, I say, dip your toe in, go on, more. Yeah. So,
who's your mentor? Do you have mentors?
Yeah, I have several.
Perhaps your dad is one of them, but who are the other mentors?
So there are several mentors, and some mentors come and go. Mm-hmm. You know, they shift every 2-3 years. Mm-hmm. When we were at my first job, there were 3-4 of us that met once a month, and we did many things together. So we are, let's say, friends, but not friends in the traditional way. You're hanging out, you're meeting once a month, or you're talking once a month, and we're kind of mentoring each other. So that stays. That's
more like a mastermind group. I think that's an amazing way to bring about change, because that group comes together, you build trust and connection, and that's your mastermind group, which I dare say is not dissimilar to what you have at the My Angel Investors. Your 12 people have become the mastermind group because you feed off each other. But who feeds you? Who feeds your imagination?
So I always look to some of the young ones who are looking at technologies or any new topic with their eye, which is an eye which I don't have the education to do. So and then I ask them to articulate it back to me.
Right.
So that's partly it's an education, partly it's a mentoring. But by me attempting to be their mentor, they're becoming my mentor. So that's one angle. There is always an angle to look a little bit spiritually, in whichever form, and it's not one religion or another religion. But normally I do that through the internet, through the social media stories that pop up. So it's not, I'm not following one particular mentor or another. And there's always somebody in the sports field. So,
is this something you would encourage other professionals, young professionals and more mature professionals, to do as a matter of routine and as an integral part of their business makeup? What you have just said.
I put a triangle in, right? So I put a young, a spiritual, and let's call it the mastermind.
Yes.
Make sure you have a balance. If you're mentored to one direction or the other direction, you don't always have the balance. So I would encourage at least 2-3 types of mentors.
What's the largest business size that you have run?
As an employee or
as an employee? As an employee. As a manager in a company, I was running a $100 million portfolio. I'm trying to understand scale, because when you're looking at small companies, large companies, often the kind of disciplines and processes are different.
Understood.
Pulling it together.
So I've managed a fund which is like $1 billion, but that's very passive. You are making small decisions with a lot of protections around it, with a lot of limits around it. So, to be honest, is that a big size business? It's a big number, but it's just a number, which doesn't mean too much. Versus I've managed a business my current business, Roland Berger, we're roughly 75 plus employees in the region. So for me, forget about the revenue it attaches, but the 75 employees and the fact that you have to be there for them and they have to trust you and be motivated by you and be their leader in whatever capacity you can, that for me, it's a 75 people relationship.
How do you inspire them? What do you do to inspire them?
First, communication. You have to over communicate as much as you can, number one. Number two, change all the time. So do something unexpected every once in a while. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. So sometimes they expect me to be very lenient, and sometimes I'm completely the opposite. Like, okay, where did that come from? But that's a wake-up call once in a while, which I feel is also a motivation. But giving them room and space and empowering them to make their own decisions, as long as they're delivering, that for me is key.
75 people and highly intelligent people in what is a highly qualified environment is a very significant number. What are the methods that you use to communicate? I mean, you explain some of your strategy, but in terms of method, what I mean by that is, do you write a weekly blog? Do you have a broadcast call to each one of them? They're obviously in different countries, running different segments, different kinds of projects. So what is the kind of discipline that a young manager needs to have to be able to communicate in this type of environment?
So there's a broader communication, which is a must-do communication, which is all 75 gets the same message. And there has to be some common thread around that over time.
Communicating with super smart 75 people, what are the methodologies you're using?
Sometimes it's a slap, and sometimes it's a smile, right? And it has to be regular enough that they expect a generic one, but it has to be irregular when it's the slap or the smile one. And that keeps them on their toes, and it keeps them motivated. So you stretch both sides.
Business is difficult to sign these days. What are the kind of things that you're doing to really lift business, and how are you engaging these people who come in, smart people, fairly entitled? How do you get them out there?
Keep them high-strung always, whether they're clients, whether they're employees, whether they're yourself. And the high-strung means that, you only tweak a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah, because every tweak, you could get it wrong, but at least you get a yes or no decision. And a no decision is better than a delayed 6 months later no decision. So for me, that's always key.
If somebody wanted to apply to your company and have the basic requirements, what would you be looking for young consultants coming on board?
But be yourself over the top. In the meeting, in the interview, on the paper, that the CV. Over the top means, guys, this is exactly how my DNA looks. Help me change it if you want, if you don't like it. But this is how it looks, and this is how I'd like to change it. This is why I'm coming to you, because maybe I need to shift this and this bit. Really in your face DNA.
So do you, as a managing partner, as a person who's employing these people with all these recruitment drives going on, do you actually look for those people who really push hard?
Yes, or at least I know where my gaps are within my 75 or whatever people. Yeah. So I am looking for specific type of people, and hence anybody who's sharing with me, how they fit or don't fit, is easier for me to choose, and it's easier for me to make my yes and no decisions. The harder it is, the slower I go, and the more risk,
Moving forward, Kush, what are the sort of things that this region is going through? Because it's going through a lot of changes. It needs 50 million jobs across the region. Entrepreneurship is very much in the flavor of the month. Is it flavor of the month, or is it the way forward?
It's the way forward. What will happen is the government/public sector is going to get out of the way, whether they are forced out of the way or they get out of the way on purpose. Privatizations, IPOs, etc., and that's going to happen. And the new owners, the new establishments will be a lot more aggressive in how they manage them, and less concerned about the image that creates.
The telcos are, as I talk to them, they're almost becoming dumb pipes, and the over-the-top services are just cleaning them out. How do you see them going in the future?
They know it, and they say, we're going to act. And for the last 5-10 years, they've known it, and they've claimed they're going to act, and they haven't. and then some of them have gone out and tried to make an all-in, all-out bet, a bit too aggressive. So I see in the next 2-3 years that several are allocating, let's say, 20, 30, 40% of their time, resources, money into taking action which is much outside their box.
Is this something that will be you as a shareholder, you as an advisor to a lot of these telcos? Do you think they have the appetite for that? Or is it something that they can't afford not to do?
They can't afford not to. They, even as a shareholder, if you expect them to be boring and dumb pipe, get out. Don't be a shareholder anymore.
Yeah, because if you look at reinvestment, if a mid-sized telco is saying that we'll reinvest 10% of, say, our top line, which is a very, very handsome number, that's the sort of number. Is there a benchmark that people are looking at, which you are advising, saying put 10% away, put 20% away in terms of the future?
So first of all, the dumb pipe is 15%.
Okay.
So 15% will just keep up the dumb pipe story.
Right.
So now you have to add the extra 5-10% on top of that to do the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that better bring you new revenue sources, new pies to eat into.
There are a lot of little companies coming up. You've got the three different kinds of companies. One is the big white sharks, the whales. Then you've got the little swordfish, which are the small, mid-size corporations. And then you have the piranhas. And these are the young companies coming in, the piranhas.
Yeah.
Do you think the recent way forward, or in the near future, it's the piranhas who are going to win?
Eat or be eaten, eat and feed and be eaten. The whole thing is happening. So what happens is a piranha grows bigger, mm-hmm. and then people attack it, or it becomes a target, or it starts providing food for the food layer below it. It creates a food chain for everybody else, and thrives by the fact that it becomes the king of that food chain, mm-hmm. and drives that because it's supported. And that I think is the future. So if you're a shark or the big king, mm-hmm. the lion, you got to make sure everybody below you is comfortable with that situation.
You actually need to keep the ecosystem running, almost that they don't start attacking you too much.
Yes.
So the Facebooks and the Googles of the world need to make sure that we survive.
Correct.
That's an interesting.
And they're giving you tools and services and infrastructure to support that.
Yeah. The e-commerce space in our region is absolutely exploding for many, many reasons. You've got obviously technology, you've got a young demographic. Is this the key space that you are operating in?
No, not at all. It's that's a tough space.
Yeah.
It's a space where you need very deep pockets and the energy to run that over a long period of time. That's not the space I am personally operating in. It's a space which I'm willing to support because they throw out so much money at different service layers as part of it. But it's not a space I invest in.
There's some great companies. I mean, obviously we've got the big Souk story, the Souk.com story. Fetchers hovering around. There's a lot of last mile solutions turning up. We even have the mobility providers like Kareem and so on in that sort of space of last mile delivery. So prima facie, looking from outside as a non-expert looking in, you sort of see, hang on, everybody's going into this business. Is this becoming too much of a gold rush? And is there a problem, or is this an industry that can absorb all of these new players coming in?
I'll give you a very random example. Within the blockchain, there are some parts of blockchain which are physical. Mm-hmm. I literally mean the vaults there are some physical elements to it. One of the companies I'm invested into has now become, in the middle of France, the second biggest user of a UPS. Okay, so I got nothing to do with food. It's nothing to do with B2C. It's a blockchain related product. Okay. So you've got a whole bunch of new products that are being serviced through delivery. So getting delivery and logistics rights will always be there. People are going to be less willing to go to a destination to purchase. Mm-hmm. They would expect that the product comes to them. So let's call it the e-commerce story. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen. It has to happen. Are there, in Dubai, are there a lot of companies chasing that space? Sure, there's motorbikes everywhere, and you hear of crashes all the time, and I'm fearing it when I drive. Yes, there's a lot of companies chasing it.
The industries that are taking shape now, we just spoke about e-commerce, but what else is there that you feel has a lot of energy, and the young people, what should they be looking for?
It's what we started the discussion with. It's education. At the beginning and at the end, it's health.
Yes.
So you got the two ends of the spectrum. How do you educate the young, and how do you make sure that the old have the healthcare?
Right.
And how do you optimize or make them as efficient as possible? How does technology help those two? So that's always there, and that'll continue to thrive. When it comes to artificial intelligence, stroke anything relating to interacting with a machine, what do you have to make that efficient again? So that's happening. And then very traditional businesses. Last night we met with a business which is 4,000 years old. It's money circles, helping each other through your daily chores. Sometimes it's about, I need some extra cash for this month versus next month. Sometimes it's who's going to do my dishwashing today, I don't have time to do it. Or who's going to pick up my kids from school, I don't have time to do it. There's a kind of sharing of support services, monetary or otherwise. So that creating business models around that, and this is not just a sharing business model, this is actually service sharing. I think that's where the future is moving.
What about barter businesses? Would that be something similar?
I think you do see that when you're able to price it. Because how do you price, how do you add a value to you for a certain baking a bread versus a value to me is completely different.
So if I have an app in between and you bake bread and I deliver a service to you, but I take 5% from you and 5% from me, so I make 10%, is that a business model that is likely to work?
As long as it's able to express, it becomes a market maker, and it's able to basically crowdsource both sides, yes.
Okay. Interesting you speak about crowdsourcing. So crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, crowd innovation on the one side, and a lot of the individuals that are now spread out because geography has become less and less relevant.
Yes.
Is this one of the big shifts that are going to take place in this part of the world that we're in?
Yeah, the platforms are supporting crowds and individuals and matching them together, mapping them together. The problem is that the so-called science that they claim is doing the mapping is not always true. So very often they're being directed, let's say, crowdsource a doctor, use a cloud or a platform to get a doctor or a fashion designer or whatever it may be. It's not as simple as, okay, they know my preferences, hence this matching has worked. Typically it's a forced match.
Right.
And how do you ensure that it's not fraudulent?
So everybody seems to be Uberizing education, Uberizing this, Uberizing that. Basically a phrase for sharing, the shared economy. Is this shared economy going to become more and more prevalent because of lack of jobs as we speak?
Sharing is happening and will happen and will continue to happen. At the same time, you're strengthening, you're shifting boundaries, right? And you're changing boundaries. And society has to support that and drive that. So there's always a limit. We all saw what happened to Uber CEO yesterday. So something breaks. And when that breaks, the model gets questioned. And so those boundaries will always have certain breaks in them. And a new model emerges.
We've seen a lot of disruption around us. We've seen disruption in the content business. We've seen disruption. Now it's coming into the financial services sector. And going forward, you mentioned two, which is education and health, and third, which is related to pharma, but also the energy sector. I mean, these are amongst the changing areas. What can we expect over the next 2, 3, 4 years in some of those sectors for young people who are watching you today and sort of say, well, is this an industry that I want to get into, or do I want to chase the piranhas and then come and fight this industry?
Look, the energy industry is a perfect topic. One, because of what Trump did in Paris, or not in Paris, but regarding Paris. It's going to create a lot of noise. And this noise will push people to act, and act in whichever form their opinion is. So that's great. I think he's forcing an agenda now, and I think that's I don't want to be around 40 years from now, 50 years from now, if my kids are going to have a hard time surviving and breathing the air, etc. And we've got to do everything possible in that. And I think a lot of energy, time, money should go into that area.
Yeah. Looking much deeper into the future, like a 10 to 20 year time horizon, and you just alluded to your kids in the year 2050, perhaps with not very clean air, and we need to work on that. But as we look forward 10 years in 2025 and 20 years into 2035, what are the big shifts that are taking place in terms of less jobs, different learnings? What are you as a thought leader looking at in your sort of crystal ball and saying, this is what we need to train, this is what we need to do?
What you need to do now, other than, like, say, learning Mandarin and code, which is the answer that I guess a large number of people are starting to give. I go back to what I've been learning since I was a kid. Learn culture, learn how to be agile, learn to keep moving, learn how to articulate yourself in different conditions. There will be a fight around you. How do you make peace? How do you avoid the fight? How do you ensure that you walk that middle ground? You always got to be there, whether you're a taekwondo and you're avoiding the punch, or whether you find a sweet talking manner to charm yourself out of the way. Whatever happens, the parts are gonna move, and you gotta find your way in there.
You got young kids. How old are they?
15 and 11.
What are you training them for on a day-to-day basis? What's the advice that you give to them? That they should be preparing themselves for the future. Future 20 years from now, you don't know what it's going to look like.
Keep smiling.
Okay.
Be in front of people and make them want you to be with them. That's the most critical.
One of the things that I always talk about, and love to hear your thoughts on it, is learning how to learn, how learning works, how your brain works, how your thinking works. Because once they've done that, then they can survive in any kind of environment. Would you agree with that, or would you like to enhance that?
Yeah, it's tough. Learning how to learn is a tough job, and you're straining yourself always to do that. Mm-hmm. My view is, if you're surrounded by people who are always educating you in different ways, mm-hmm. then you're doing it in a much easier way. Maybe it's the same answer in a different way. Mm-hmm. You don't always have to be the one that's pushing the energy to learn.
What advice would you give to your young 18-year-old self who has just arrived at Cambridge, knowing all the things that you know today when you look back?
I should have spent a little bit more money not looking like a nerd at the beginning and had a bit more fun.
Okay.
I think the first year or first couple of years was very serious. It could have flipped it the other way around. So I do look back and say, did I fully participate? Probably not. Okay, that's one piece of advice, that is, play hard, work hard. The second piece is to stay in touch with all those people. It's been a long time, and many of those people that I was with were great friends. That, yes, Facebook allows you to be friends with them and get back in touch, but that's still, you should have been more regular, more frequent, more in their face, understand them, and stay with that understanding over a long period of time.
Let me take you on to a fun journey. Let's imagine we're in a time capsule and we can actually time travel into the future. And imagine today is your 90th birthday. And you look back, and we're celebrating your 90th birthday. Your 65-year-old kids are there. Yeah. And your 25-year-old grandkids are all there, and we're all looking up to Kush. Grandfather Kush. Firstly, are you going to be a grumpy old grandfather? Are you going to be a fun grandfather? That's the first thing. But what are we celebrating? What have you achieved in the next 30, 40, 50 years? First
of all, I hope it's not grandchildren. I hope it's great-grandchildren, because a 40-year gap is too much.
Okay.
So if I'm 90, I better have great-grandchildren. That's one. Okay. Second, as I said, I want that full chain smiling. No sad faces in the family tree. That's important. That's probably the most important thing. No, fine, there might always be
ups and downs,
health and all of that kind of things, but as long as critical is that it's a happy family.
So that's your family. What about others? What about others looking at you? People that you've touched in your lives, employees, friends, associates. They'll all be looking at you and saying, "I wish Kush had done that," or Kush has actually achieved that in the next 30 years of his life.
Yeah.
Because you're at an amazing inflection point in your life, and you're there, and you can do that, or you can do that, and this cruise.
It's very simple for me. It's what I said. I want people to take risks, and it's not about the risks I took. It's the risks I made others take, so that when I'm 90, they said, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have done that. If it wasn't for him, I would have been a bit more, I would have avoided certain actions which have now resulted in success or not.
So how do you make a difference in your life? How does is this the way you make a difference?
You communicate. I spend a lot of time with people. I can't do it sitting on my computer or on my desk or on my couch. I have to be in front of people, and I have to keep interacting, and they have to keep interacting, and that's the biggest difference I make.
Other than your family, which is a fairly obvious one, but if a genie came in and rubbed a lamp and sort of popped out, I mean, a genie probably looks like me, because I look like a genie. But if a genie pops out and says to you, "Well, I'm going to give you one wish, Kush," and what would that wish be that would help to make the greatest impact in your life and around you, fulfilling your desires?
Make the day 25 hours, not 24.
Only 25, not 48.
1 hour is going to make a big difference.
All right, that's a big wish to a genie.
I bring back time.
Bring back time. You've lived a life in different continents. You've traveled all over the world. You've built great businesses and companies. They have a wonderful family. So you're a very accomplished, well-rounded human being. What would satisfy you now? How do you see yourself pushing forward as you go into the future?
Sometimes you have to work hard to stay still, right?
Yeah.
If that momentum was on its own, so you're not working hard to stay still, that's on its own momentum, then everything I do, that extra time I put, is either to go put myself forward or to put others forward. That would satisfy me, right? So working in order to push others forward or myself forward, etc., beyond the current circumstance. And I think that's always the complicated one in my line of business, where time is based on the amount value, money or value is based on the amount of time I put in. You're working to stand still. If it's a product or a service that is doing it for you, and then the time you put in is into enhancing other people, enhancing yourself, that's critical.
Is there any question that you wanted to talk about, any emotion, any thought that I may have missed that you'd like to share with us?
So bringing back, let's talk about energy, right? So energy, motivation, adrenaline, that's kind of themes that I work with around people. How do you bring that into a work environment? How do you bring it into a play environment, into whatever environment, a kid's family environment? So in the old days, a TV did it in a TV room, a family room, and you're watching a sitcom or you're watching something that brings that, or you're playing a board game together, etc. In the new days, it's starting to get detached into a handset or a device, and you start losing that level of energy, and the energy is going into a game or something. So how do we bring it back? How do we bring people together with a level of energy back into society? Is it sometimes an issue that people talk about? Is it what catalyzes that? And for me, that's where the future needs to be people, a Mad Talks or a TED Talks or whoever that brings a topic, a subject into everybody's lives and creates an emotion. That's one of the things about Dubai Angels. One of the things that's working really well with Dubai Angels is we allow a company to pitch to us. Great fun, great adrenaline in that. But the biggest adrenaline happens when there's 10, 12 of us sitting around effectively like a majlis style and explaining to each other our views. Mm-hmm. And very different perspectives with very different opinions and trying to sway each other's views. That's where the action is. And that's what brings energy to the room.
What advice do you have to a young 24, 25-year-old who's out there with a basic level degree looking for a job?
Know what you're good at. Make that very clear to everybody around you. Know what you're not good at and make it very clear how whichever job you're going for will help take you to that next level. And be transparent, be open.
That authenticity is the sort of thing that really attracts, because people can see BS now a mile away, and I think that's that core authenticity that we look for. It's been an amazing chat. Thank you for being candid and open and authentic, and I've got to know you better and better, and I'm very, very grateful to all of the wonderful things you're doing. Thank you very much indeed.